Welcome to the Theology of Love. I'm your host, Daddy Noy. Today we're going to continue chapter by chapter of the Bible, and we're in Numbers chapter 19. And I want to say this is one of those chapters that can sound very strange to modern ears. It talks about a red heifer, ashes, water for purification, contact with a dead body, and why someone who touches death becomes ritually unclean for 7 days. So today we're going to slow down and ask what this meant inside the ancient Israelite worldview. We're going to talk about why death was seen as contaminating, why ritual purification mattered, and what this chapter may reveal about the human fear of death. Then we're going to bring it into our world, because even if we don't think about ritual purity in the same way as ancient Israel did, we still have our own ways of coping with death and the mystery of mortality. So let's start with the chapter itself. Numbers 19 gives instructions for what is usually called the ritual of the red heifer. The Israelites are told to bring a red cow, one without defect and one that has never been yoked, to Eleazar, the priest. The animal is taken outside the camp, slaughtered, and then burned completely. Its hide, flesh, blood, and even its dung are burned. Then the cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson yarn are thrown into the fire. Afterward, the ashes are gathered and stored outside the camp. Numbers 19:9 says that these ashes are kept for the community as part of the water of purification. Then the chapter turns to the death impurity. In Numbers 19:11 says that anyone who touches a dead body, a dead human body, becomes unclean for 7 days. They are to be purified on the 3rd day and then again on the 7th day. If they don't undergo this purification, they remain unclean. The text even says they defile the tabernacle of the Lord if they enter the sacred space without being purified, as we see in Numbers 19:13. Then the chapter expands the idea. If someone dies in a tent, everyone who enters that tent and every open vessel inside becomes unclean. If someone touches a corpse, a bone, or a grave, that person also becomes unclean. Then the ashes are mixed with the fresh water, and someone who is clean sprinkles that water on the unclean person, the tent, and the objects. After the 7th day washing, the person is restored. That's the basic summary of the chapter. Now, if we read this too quickly, we might think, what in the world is going on here? But I think the first important thing is to understand that ritual impurity in the Hebrew Bible is not the same thing as sin. That matters. A person was not necessarily morally bad because they became unclean. In many cases, becoming ritually unclean was a part of normal life. Birth, bodily fluids, disease, and death could all create ritual impurity. Jonathan Klawans, in his work on impurity and sin in the ancient Judaism, makes this distinction very clearly. Ritual impurity and moral impurity are related in later Jewish discussion, but they are not the same category in the biblical texts. Ritual impurity often comes from the natural human conditions, not moral rebellion. So if someone touched a dead body, the text isn't saying you're evil. It's saying you've come in contact with death, and that encounter places you in a different ritual state. And to understand why that mattered, we have to enter the ancient Israelite worldview. In the priestly imagination, God is associated with life, holiness, order, and creation. The tabernacle is the symbolic center of divine presence among the people. So the closer you get to sacred space, the more carefully life has to be ordered. Death, on the other hand, represents the opposite direction. Death is not this just sadness. It's not just biology. Death is the breakdown of life. It's the reversal of vitality. It's the thing that reminds everyone that creation is fragile. Jacob Milgrom, one of the major scholars of Leviticus and Numbers, argued that corpse impurity is one of the most intense form of ritual impurity because death stands in direct opposition to the sphere of life associated with God. In that reading, the red heifer ritual is not random magic. It's a symbolic movement from the realm of death back towards the realm of life. Even the blood imagery matters. Leviticus 17:11 says the life of the flesh is in the blood. Milgrom's work helps us see the red heifer ritual as a purification offering that decontaminates death, impurity, and helps restore the person to the community of life. That's very different than from saying death bodies are disgusting and God is offended by them. It's more like saying death is the most powerful symbol of life's collapse. And before a person re-enters the sacred center of the community, that encounter has to be acknowledged, contained, and ritually transformed. I think this is important because ancient Israel lived much closer to death than most of us do today. Death was not hidden away in hospitals and funeral homes. Families handled death directly. Bodies were prepared quickly. Burial happened close to the community. Disease, childbirth, complications, war, famine, and sudden loss were much more immediate realities. So when Numbers 19 talks about the impurity of touching a corpse, I don't think we should hear superstition first. I think we should hear a deeply ancient attempt to deal with the most frightening reality human beings faced. Death. And this is where the chapter becomes very human to me, because what do human beings do when something terrifies them? We create structure, ritual, and language that help us move through the mystery so that it doesn't consume us. And that is what Numbers 19 seems to be doing. It gives the community a process. There is a way to name and handle the death event. There is a waiting period, ritual washing, sprinkling, and finally a return. The ritual says, in effect, yes, death has come close. Yes, this has disrupted the order of life. But there is a path back. You are not permanently trapped in the shadow of death. You can return to the community. You can return to sacred space. You can return to life. That feels profound to me. And I think this is where Mary Douglas is also helpful. In Purity and Danger, Douglas argued that purity systems often function as symbolic systems of order. What a culture calls impure is not always about physical dirt in the modern sense. It often has to do with things that don't fit the symbolic order of the community. Death is the ultimate disruption. It crosses boundaries. It turns a living person into a body. It forces the community to confront the limits of control. And I think we still understand this, even if we don't use the same language. When someone is near a dead body, people get quiet. They speak less. They move more slowly and lower their voices. It's almost as if everyone in the room knows someday this will be me too. Not in a morbid way necessarily, but in a way that says something sacred and terrifying is present. We tread softly and around death. We whisper around the dead, almost as if our reverence keeps death at a respectable distance, as if being too loud or too casual might somehow call it closer. Now, most of us don't literally believe that if we speak too loudly near a corpse, death will come for us sooner, but the instinct is still there. The body knows how to become reverent before the mystery, and that, to me, is where the ancient and modern people are not so different. Ancient Israel had the red heifer, that ashes, water, and washing, and 7 days of waiting. Modern people have hospitals, funeral homes, grief therapy, and memorial services. We also have life insurance, black clothing, cemeteries, and quiet rooms where we speak softly because we know something enormous has happened. Different forms, same human confrontation. We are still trying to cope with death. We are still trying to give shape to grief. We are still trying to tell ourselves that life can continue after the thing we feared most has entered the room. This is also where modern psychology can help us make sense of what we're seeing. Ernest Becker famously argued that much of human culture is shaped by the awareness of death. Later, terror management theory developed this idea into a psychological framework, arguing that human beings use cultural worldviews, meaning systems, identity, and symbolic forms of continuity to manage the anxiety created by knowing we are mortal. I want to be careful here. I'm not saying ancient Israelites were secretly using modern psychology. They weren't. But modern psychology gives us a language for something humans have probably always felt. We know we're going to die, and that awareness creates a deep need for meaning, order, and reassurance. And Numbers 19 is one ancient answer to that problem. It is an ancient priestly way of saying death is real, but death does not get the final word inside the community of life. This is also why I think the red heifer ritual is so interesting. The ashes purify the person who is unclean, but the people who prepare the ashes become unclean themselves. Numbers 19 says, the priest, the one who burns the animal, the one who gathers the ashes, and even the one who sprinkles the water, becomes unclean until evening. That is strange at first. The thing that purifies also contaminates. But maybe that paradox is part of the point. Death isn't easily handled. Even the systems created to manage death has to come into contact with death's symbolic power. The cleanser is affected by what it cleanses. The purifier is touched by the impurity it removes. That feels strangely honest to me. Anyone who has ever helped someone die, buried a loved one, sat in a hospital room, or held the grief of a family knows this. You don't walk away untouched, even when you're helping, even when you're loving, even when you're doing the right thing. Death leaves something on you. Not morally, not because you did something wrong, but because you came close to the mystery. Ancient Israel gave people a way to move through that. This is something compassionate. There's something compassionate about that. We may not need the same rituals today. We may not even believe in the same ritual categories, but the need underneath it still makes sense. When people experience death, they need time. They need acknowledgement. They need community. They need a way to return to life without pretending nothing happened. And I think this is one reason mourning rituals matter so much. Funerals are not just ceremonies for the dead. They are also structures for the living. They give grief a place to go. They let people gather, remember, cry, speak, sit in silence, and begin the painful movement back into life. Modern research on grief rituals has also noted that rituals can help people organize grief and restore a sense of stability after loss. Again, that does not mean every ritual works for everyone, but it does show that rituals is not irrational. A ritual can be one of the ways humans survive the emotional disruption of death. So when we read Numbers 19, maybe the question is not, why would they think touching a corpse made someone unclean? Maybe the better question is, what were they trying to do with the terror and the mystery of death? That question changes everything, because then we stop looking down on ancient people and start recognizing ourselves in them. They had ashes and water. We have flowers and candles. They waited 7 days. We take bereavement leave, gather for memorials, or sit Shiva in Jewish tradition. They worried about sacred space being disrupted by death. We worry about emotional space, psychological space, and the way death destabilizes our lives. They had priests. We have pastors, rabbis, therapists, doctors, hospice workers, funeral directors, and family members who help us cross these hard thresholds. Again, different forms, same human struggle. And that's what I find so poignant. These ancient stories and rituals may feel old. The details may no longer apply directly to our lives, but the struggle beneath them is still our struggle. We don't need to duplicate ancient Israel's response in order to learn from it. We can look at their response as one expression in the larger landscape of human experience. And maybe that's part of what makes the Bible so valuable. It preserves the ancient human attempt to answer questions we are still asking. What is death? What happens when someone we love dies? What do we live? What do we live with uncertainty? How do we live with uncertainty? How do we return to life after grief? How do we remain connected to God or to meaning or to the sacred when mortality has come close enough to touch us? Those are not ancient questions only. Those are human questions. And I think Numbers 19 gives us one ancient priestly answer. Death disrupts life. So the community creates a ritual to acknowledge the disruption and restore the person back into sacred order. Now, I don't personally read this as God being afraid of dead bodies, and I don't think we need to read it as God being disgusted by grief or mortality. I think the text reflects an ancient worldview where holiness and life are deeply connected, and where death had to be symbolically managed because it represented the undoing of life. But I also think we can go one step deeper. Maybe the reason death frightens us so much is because life feels sacred to us. Maybe that's why the dead body silences a room. Maybe that's why we whisper. Maybe that's why cultures across time have created rituals around death. Because somewhere inside us, we know life matters. We know the person mattered. We know consciousness, relationship, memory, love, presence, and being itself are not small things. Death shakes us because life is holy. And that, to me, is one of the most beautiful things this chapter can still teach us. Not that we need to fear impurity in the same way ancient Israel did. Not that we need the ashes of a red heifer, but that we should not rush past death too quickly. We should not pretend death is nothing. We should not hide from the way it humbles us. Death brings us to the edge of mystery, and when we stand at that edge, we should be gentle with ourselves. We should be gentle with others, because all humans struggle with this. Ancient people struggle with it. Modern people struggle with it. Religious people struggle with it, and secular people struggle with it. People with strong faith still grieve. People with deep spiritual beliefs still feel loss. People who believe in heaven still cry at funerals because love does not become painless just because we have hope. And that's important. Comfort doesn't mean pretending death is easy. Comfort means remembering that fear is normal, grief is normal, and the questions that come up around death are part of being human. But I also think the Bible story, when we read deeply and broadly, keeps inviting us to remember that we are more than what we perceive. We are more than this temporary form. We are more than the body that eventually returns to dust. Genesis says humanity is made in the image of God. Acts 17 says that in God we live and move and have our being. Jesus tells people not to be consumed with anxiety, reminding them in Matthew 6 that life is held in a deeper care than fear can usually see. And I know people interpret these passages differently, and I'm not trying to force one dogmatic conclusion on anyone. But the thread I hear running through so much of Scripture is this: you are not merely a fragile biological accident trying to survive a meaningless universe. You are connected to something deeper. You are held in something larger. You carry something divine, and if God is infinite, if God is in everything, and is the ground of all being, then we are not separate from that reality. We are expressions of it. We are pieces of the divine, unique expressions of God in this world, living for a time in these bodies, in these stories, in these identities, in these beautiful and painful experiences we call life. And if that is true, then some part of us is invulnerable to this life's impermanence. The form changes, the body changes, the story changes, but the deeper essence of what we are belongs to something eternal. That is where I find comfort, not just in a picture of heaven as a faraway place, although I understand why that image comforts many people. And I would never want to take that comfort from anyone. But for me, the deeper comfort is not that there may be somewhere else we go after we die. The deeper comfort is that what we are at the deepest level is already rooted in God. We are not trying to become worthy of divine love. We come from it. We live within it. We return to it because we never truly are separate from it. And maybe that's what death rituals are trying to help us remember in their own ways. The ancient Israelite ritual of Numbers 19 said, you have encountered death, but there's a way back into life. And maybe the deeper ritual message we can carry forward is this. Yes, we encounter death. Yes, we grieve. Yes, we fear the mystery. But death does not erase the sacredness of life. It does not erase the deeper divine reality within us. So when we read Numbers 19, we don't have to pretend the ritual makes perfect sense to us all in every detail. We don't have to become the ancient Israelites. We don't have to adopt their purity system as our own. But we can respect it. We can learn from it. We can see it as one ancient human attempt to speak to the fear we still carry. And maybe we can let it ask us some honest questions. How do I respond to death? How do I hide from it? Do I ritualize it? Do I let it make me more afraid, or does it make life feel more sacred? When I stand near death, what does it reveal about what I truly value? And when I think of my own mortality, can I remember that I am more than this temporary form? That may be the real gift of this chapter for us today. Numbers 19 may not give us a modern theology of death. It may not answer every question we have, but it does show us that humans have always needed ways to face mortality, to move through fear and return to life. And in that sense, this strange ancient chapter becomes strangely beautiful, because underneath the ashes, the water, the waiting, and the ritual purity system, we find something deeply human. We find people trying to live near death without being swallowed by it. We find a community trying to preserve sacred order in a fragile world. We find ancient Israel saying in its own symbolic language that life matters, death disrupts, and a return is possible. And maybe that's still a word we need. Death is real. Grief is real. Fear is real. But so is life. So is love. So is the divine mystery that holds us even when we don't fully understand it. So maybe we can tread softly around death, not because we're terrified in a hopeless way, but because we recognize that we are standing near something sacred. And maybe we can live more gently. We can live more gently because of it, more awake, more grateful, more aware that every person we meet is also mortal, also fragile, also carrying questions they may not know how to say aloud. And maybe that awareness can make us more loving. That's what I hope we take from Numbers 19. Not a fear of contamination, but a deeper reverence for life. Not a need to copy ancient rituals, but a humility that recognizes our own rituals too, and not despair in the face of death, but comfort in the possibility that we truly are, that what we truly are is held in something much larger than death itself. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Theology of Love. This is, if this helped you think about Numbers 19, death, grief, or a way human beings have always searched for meaning, I'd love for you to keep walking through this journey with me. Share your thoughts, ask your questions, and bring your own reflections into the conversations. And we'll see you in the next chapter soon.